You just have to keep going. You have to want it enough to wake up tomorrow and do the same thing over.
This was me being a hustler.
The only way that I've gotten to this point in my life is to try to treat people the way I want to be treated.
Welcome to Ground Zero Growth with your host, Sam Sapp, owner of Lockbon.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm really excited today to introduce my guest, Navy Bob, former commanding officer or chief operating officer of a nuclear submarine and holder of the nuclear football at one point. And that's just to name a couple. I feel like we could keep going on and on. Husband, father, fantastic titles. How are you doing today?
Good, Sam. Such an honor and privilege to be here. Really excited.
I thank you. I'm not sure if I'll hear higher marks than that. We'll see. I'm really excited to go into detail, and for the sake of the audience, so you've written a book, Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love, from the nuclear Navy to the White House and healthcare. And the reason I want to kind of start with showcasing the book is because there might be moments where we just lightly touch on things. And that's because this book is, interestingly enough, a lot of what we try to get into in the podcast. And I absolutely love that. I don't know if I've read a book that's quite as genuine with regards to you. I don't feel like you left a stone unturned. You went into detail on the things that other writers might find embarrassing or might gloss over, and I also enjoyed that there wasn't a lot of assumptions. Considering your role, I'm sure there's a lot of information you tend to take for granted. As somebody who's never even been through the Navy, I felt like I could follow this pretty darn well. And so anyway, I just, for the sake of the viewership, if we gloss over anything, I would highly encourage you to purchase the book. So the way we start this is, what are you doing currently?
So I have wrote two books. One is Beyond the Sea, and another one is High Reliability Healthcare, sharing the secrets of the nuclear Navy to save patient lives. So there, it's talking about the crisis we have in healthcare and the error rates. I don't know if you know this, but if you go into the hospital, you have a 1 in 10 chance of developing complications. It's the third leading cause of death in the country behind cardiovascular disease and cancer is medical errors. And this is equivalent of an Arlington cemetery being filled every year with people that die in the hospital because of medical errors that shouldn't. It's equivalent to a plane going down every day, approximately 300 to 400 people every day dying in the hospital that shouldn't. And I'm not talking about they go in on their last, this is medical errors where they give the wrong medication or misdiagnosis. So what I'm doing today is one is that sharing leading with love we'll get into, but also never been done before. Has the secrets of the nuclear Navy been embedded into healthcare? And I know that this can improve the safety record that's so much needed today. So wrote two books and I'm speaking, but now I'm creating a consulting seminar and curriculum for leading with love and high reliability healthcare.
Wow. I don't know if I realized that the rate was that high. The first thing that comes to mind is that's almost pre-germ theory, right? Back when women didn't want to go into the hospital to deliver children because at the end of the day, the likelihood of them dying was so high.
It is. And it's a crisis that we're not addressing. And, we're tackling now accountability, but Google it. John Hopkins did a study in 2018 where 240,000 people per year die in the hospital that shouldn't. And I have witnessed errors that shouldn't. Not to mention these are people dying, 240,000. We're not mentioning about the complication rates or someone getting injured in the hospital. These are people that are actually dying. That is just unacceptable rate. And sharing the secrets of the nuclear Navy, which is the highest reliable organization that ever existed in the world for over 75 years, the nuclear Navy has never had a reactor accident, and they have 20-year-old sailors operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors. And so in that book, it really shares the secrets of what the nuclear Navy does and how today healthcare can adopt that. But in there, why I wrote the other book, Leading with Love, is that you can't have high reliability without effective leadership, caring leadership. And you can't have effective leadership if you're not meeting success or marks or having people die underneath your helm. So those two books go hand in hand for leadership and success.
That's fascinating. There's a local hospital here. I'll avoid giving the name, but they kind of have a bit of a reputation for almost what you're talking about. And it's been absolutely fascinating to me because I've had kind of a close run-in with that hospital, such that, for lack of any better term, I've almost kind of become an apostate. And it's just interesting to me talking to other people and hearing confirmatory stories. And it's fascinating to me that a hospital can get away with being known for, people will say, don't drop them off there, drive to the next hospital. I don't care how far away it is. You're just increasing your likelihood of, and it's to the point to where I was talking to somebody who didn't realize that was true, and the person next to them did, but they just hadn't been vocal about it, and they were family, and they were like, no. This is a very real thing that he's talking about. Don't go to that hospital if you can avoid it. And so interesting, but let's circle back to this because we'll get stuck on this rabbit hole too. So I want to talk about what was kind of your first dream, and I think maybe it's a little bit unfair to quite call it a dream because it sounds like, if I recall, it was almost a high school colleague that helped spark that initial interest.
Oh, yeah, Sam. And so, again, what I'm about to tell you is that I don't make decisions off of movies, but in this case, it came through. And so I'll take you way back to high school. Like many high school students, they don't know what they want to do when they grow up. And so Top Gun, the first Top Gun was out. I want to be a pilot. And I started the process to apply to the Naval Academy to be a pilot. And what I found is I didn't have 20/20 vision. And back in 1987, when I was graduating high school, there were no LASIK or PRK waivers. And so if you wanted to be a pilot, and you had to have 20/20 vision at the time. So my dreams were shattered. And in fact, I started looking at the requirements for the Naval Academy. I felt like I was out of the league because although I had a good standing in high school, my SAT scores needed to be improved. So I was introduced to the Merchant Marines. I went to SUNY Maritime College to be a Merchant Marine sailor. And during that time period, I started getting, I was the big fish in a small pond. I really hunkered down, wanted to get an education. I had the drive, and I started doing really well. And so during that time period, they started to solicit other schools to join the nuclear Navy. And if you don't know this, 1/3 of the accessions from the Naval Academy come out of the Naval Academy for nuclear power. The other 1/3 or 2/3 come from ROTC, which are the high technical schools like Penn State, MIT, but they also have this other program called NUPOC, where they go to other schools to be able to solicit the candidates to go into the most prestigious, technically advanced nuclear power. And so at the time, I was going to be a Merchant Marine sailor. And in the book, I talk about my close friend, best friend, his name was Eric, who now works for the NTSB. He says, this is a free trip. Why don't we go to Norfolk? We can see an aircraft carrier. I said, Eric, I'm not joining the Navy. And I said, I'm not. And he says, come on, it's a free trip just to do it. So I toured an aircraft carrier. I toured a submarine, and the camaraderie, teamwork, really, really, like, I was interested. And at the time, Hunt for Red October was out. And so that's how I got into the nuclear Navy, and I agreed to do it.
I'm seeing I'm at the point now in the book where I'm seeing a trend a little bit too with regards to your oh shoot, I struggle with the name now, starts with the D, but the gentleman that convinced you to go to the White House, to go to DC for the sake of that position, he also kind of sold you a little bit.
He did. And so if you want to go fast forward, and so going back,
yep, sorry.
the reason why, no, it just, you sparked something. And so why did I write this book? I didn't, I was already, spent 28 years of my life, 8 years of my life underwater, right? The last thing I wanted to do is write a book. And I had no interest of writing a book. But there was a phenomena that really, really struck my interest, is that the leadership that I was taught in the Navy and the leadership that I learned in my academics, even in I teach at a academic university now, and what we're teaching is not what worked for me. And it and I started realizing, what are some of the greatest leaders that have ever existed, and what were their traits? Like, if you look, I'll just name a few, and I'll ask you, what are some of the greatest leaders of all times? So, uh, some of them are Martin Luther King, right? Look what Martin
Right.
Luther did. And how did he do it? He led with love. He has a book out, about leading with love and changing the civil rights and how we treat, people in this world. And you talk about a leader. The two things was, he led with love, and he made such an impact through success. And this is rooted in religion. Religion is, if you look, is, some would say, and I'll use one religion, is Catholic, is Christian. And the greatest leader, some would say, is Jesus Christ. How did Jesus lead? He led with love. And did he have success? Some would say absolutely. He forever changed. And if you look at the greatest leadership book that's ever been written and referred to, is the Bible. And so this was my aha moment, is that I'm not saying I'm Jesus Christ. I'm not Martin Luther King. But what I did, and I'm not trying to take religion and put it into any organization. I'm trying to put what works and practically works to every organization, and that is love. And call it whatever you want, compassion. That I know worked for me, and this is what we're not teaching. And so when I wrote this book was not written to share my stories of, behind enemy lines on a nuclear submarine, or carrying the nuclear codes, or my time. These are examples to show the really profound impact. So any leader that's listening to this, if they want to change a game-changing way of leadership, to have your outcomes go beyond all expectations, to become a legendary leader, build a legendary culture, and live a most fulfilling life, it costs nothing, and it will save you more time. Then lead with compassion and always look for success. And so if you want to change your leadership, your life, this is the book that does it. And that was my purpose of why I wrote this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and it shows in the book the way, and it's you're right. So it's fantastic to see that the model, because you compare multiple different models to the running of a nuclear submarine. And I think you did a pretty good job, for me reading it, on like the SOPs and processes involved at the infinitesimal level to make sure, and maybe I'm speaking as an ignorant here, but we just don't blow up in the middle of the water. And even the leadership that required for the whole program to come up to begin with. That was what I wanted to say. So you're going to love this question, and I hate to pull it forward, but we have our motto over here is taken straight from Isaac Newton, and it's, if we have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And I saw that played out again and again and again. Whenever possible, you paid homage to the curator of the idea, of the concept. And it was cool to see. And I don't know if is this something potentially with the Navy as well? Is it, as you're going through, you're required to learn of the nuclear program and the father of that program and his level of leadership, or was that just something you took on?
So I learned it from my father. And again, anybody can learn this, and leadership can be learned, but I really learned it from my second commanding officer. His name is Bruce Grooms. And Bruce Grooms, and I'll give you some examples of leading with love, is that it was unlike, and it was, and I'm actually talking to him where he learned it. But the fact is, we did not learn this in any leadership school in the Navy. And the book is titled Beyond the Sea. And this is not taught outside the Navy as well. And that was my aha moment. And that's why I called it Beyond the Sea, because this is applicable to every single industry. In fact, I just met with a PhD student from a prestigious Florida college, not UCF. And she has her PhD and she took a master's leadership course. And she says, Bob, she says, I was more confused about leadership after taking a leadership course than I was before. And she's right. You learn something, right? You learn the history of leadership, this theory, that theory, but it doesn't give you the distilled playbook to be able to do that. I'll go into a little bit more detail in the book that you can get this. And one of the things that love is, right, is define. We need to define this, and it turns off a lot of people. And if a guy who carried the nuclear codes in charge of a $2 billion nuclear submarine talks about love, you can too. And what it is not a sign of weakness. It is not romantic. It is not being taken advantage of. It is a mindset that you put people first. And how we define, and we're really getting to the roots of what love is. Love is being empathetic. Love is being vulnerable. Love is being authentic. Love is being accountable. But after you make sure that that person knows fully what the standards are, this is what love is. And I'll give you an example of one quick one. So one of the things of love is building relationships, what we need to build, right? Your greatest tool of any organization, the greatest horsepower, the greatest engine is your people. How many people have a playbook where they can go out and build relationships? I would say very few, right? They're in there. It's called, email, security, right? We're slaves to our email, our PowerPoints, or presenting to the first thing that drops off is the people. And yet the people are your greatest asset to drive your success. And so Mr. Rogers has this wonderful saying. It says, love and success. It has to be in that order. That's simple, yet that difficult. So putting people first, and there's something simple. Like when I used to round the submarine, right? It's important first to put it on your schedule that you go out and about, like Colin Powell did, to make sure that you interacted with the team. To go around and to stop for 5 seconds to say, Petty Officer Mankins, how is your wife Amber doing? How was that birthday party last week? Oh, that's great. By the way, do you have any concerns? Nope, great. You move on. How much it took 5 seconds of your day to have that empathy, that sincerity, to build those relationships. This is what I want to teach these leaders, that this is the greatest thing as you can do as a leader, to build those relationships with practical tools so that you can unleash not only your full potential as a leader, but those that you serve. And that's the purpose of leadership.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because we can talk about this. And I like this. So some of the more inspiring leaders that I've met, so I can think of one of them, very, very higher up individual in a large organization. And the first time I met him, he showed up in a pullover jacket and he just sat down at the table and we had coffee and yucked it up as if we were best friends. And he'd say, we had him on the podcast, actually, I'll shout him out now. That's Kenny Pointer. He'd say, I go around and you can ask anybody in the office. I'll be the first one to fist bump everybody. He's like, I'm kind of known for fist bumping. And, it stems right out of the book that comes to my mind is outside of the Bible, which is definitely there, is How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I like to quote this because I think it's very relevant. One of his friends said he didn't like the title, that influence people felt a little bit shallow, because the reality is the book is just about how to be a really good person. And it's exactly that. It's remembering their name, remembering that they're married, remembering that something we're going to bring up at some point is my daughter, Sophia, also spelled PH. So I couldn't help but appreciate that. The right spelling, in my opinion, audience members, sorry. And so anyway, yeah, but you're right. So it doesn't have to take a whole lot either, does it?
No, and Sam, I clearly, my limited experience, which was something, is that I don't have all the answers, but what I see is this gap, exactly like the leader you had that wrote the book. And I actually met with a senior executive at Lockheed Martin just the other day, and he's telling me what he did. And when he retired, there were people coming out of the woodwork to come and tell him how great he was and so forth. And he says, my success was not because I did everything correct or I did it better than anyone else. My success came from my relationships with the people and how I made them feel through word of mouth. Not to say you do this because you want to get promoted, right? You do it authentically. And he says what he would do every day, he would walk around the cubicles and he would look at the pictures and say, oh, who's this? Who's that? And they would expect it. And over time, he built these relationships up. And he says that's the reason why all these people came to his retirement. And so I asked him, I said, where is that written? Where did you learn that? And he says, I don't know. I just picked it up. And I said, this is the problem. I said, we should be teaching this in elementary schools, high schools, our academic and our leadership curriculum on why is it that you are successful? And looking back on me, you know, I screened for executive officer when there was like 46% selection rate. I screened for captain on the first look, which was 8% of this already cream of the crop where I already felt had the imposter syndrome. And they wanted me to go interview amongst the cream of the crop of the Navy for the nuclear, carrying the nuclear codes. And it wasn't me. If you read my book, I was a normal kid on a farm that I grew up. I didn't have, you know, I was probably average plus intelligence, and I didn't have any special ability. The only special ability I had that I can contribute was the outlier is how I led with love, how I really call it whatever you want, you know, building the team, making them feel valued. And when I did that, they feel that they could trust me, that I had standards and that I led with empathy. And I go through this in the book and the examples. I unleashed the full potential of 160 people on that ship. And when I did that, that inflection point of them all doing more than what they wanted, their full potential, and it gave them this field of dreams model. And that is what caused us, there's no doubt in my mind, to be the best submarine when I was XO. That was the reason why we were the best submarine when I was CO. And that is why I carried the nuclear codes, not because of my ability, is because I shared these practical ways to build relationships. And that's what I want to share with the book. But most importantly, I want to take what I have in the book and put practical ways that we can build academic curriculums or leadership courses or seminars to give people a playbook to say this is the most effective, which we don't have today.
Well, and I think there's a direct correlation in business too. You know, on like the military side, it might be tied to rank. On business, let's just call a spade and tie it to financials. I have a specific example where one of our clients is directly attributable easily enough to me calling a friend and singing happy birthday. And what's wild is I now do that so much more than I did before. I maybe call it shallow, like you're just calling to wish people happy birthday because it might, I don't know. I just know at that point it was attributable to a new client and I'm trying to grow my business. So if now every opportunity I can, I try to call or message or sing happy birthday. And never mind the profit, what I've thoroughly enjoyed personally is sometimes it's a near complete stranger that I sing happy birthday, and it is not uncommon anymore that they will message me back and say, dude, that was the coolest thing today. Thank you so much for making my day. And even at 2 birthdays a day takes me 3 minutes tops to get it done, as long as I'm just a little purposeful about it.
So Sam, exactly what you did. We are capturing these great practical tools as leaders. And we have data, empirical evidence-based data that shows leaders that go out and talk to their people, to provide constructive feedback, to be able to provide recognition. That will, like one hospital system, saved over $100 million in turnover when that effective leadership score went up. But it's also important that leaders that do this, they have to have the mindset of love when they go out and round, that they are empathetic, that they're doing it not to do it because they have to, but they do it and they have one-on-ones that they really genuinely care for the individual and love and instill empathy. That is the key ingredient that we want to share and give them a playbook to do this. And I'll give you one quick example of many that I don't know why I did this, but I learned is that every time one of my sailors, when I was captain, had a milestone, they would get promoted or they would get their dolphins, their insignia, whatever their milestone was, I would send a quick letter and I would tell the parents to either their wife or their parents that you contributed to this. You are such wonderful parents. And I know your son or daughter wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you. And I just wanted to say how proud I am of him and so grateful for your incredible parenting. And when I had the book come out, one of the sailors showed me a picture of every single letter that I sent to his mother and how she kept that. The joy that I not only brought him, and this is one of the contributing factors of why he stayed in and continued doing this to others and spread joy to everyone else. And it didn't cost anything. I just signed my name and put, happy, so glad to do it. Right. I already did that. That brought so much joy to his family to be so proud. Why aren't we doing this? And again, I don't have to do that, but these great tricks of really looking at a leader's time, how much time are they actually doing to build those relationships and understanding the greatest asset for any organization is not doing PowerPoints, is not answering emails to their bosses, is not looking at financials. But as you do that and you take away your time for your team members, it actually gets harder. You're going to have more emails. You're going to have more PowerPoints and more answering of email. They don't understand that their pure gift in any organization is the people. And once you do that, right, success is important. Don't get me wrong. Success, financial, safety. They don't understand the formula, as Mr. Rogers said. Love has to come first. And it's not costing anything. You're going around anyways. It's so simple to sign your name to something and show that you genuinely care for them with that mindset. Your outcomes, just like that guy from Raytheon that I talked about, he became one of the top-notch leaders is because he did something so simple on a daily basis that really enjoyed and made people feel valued. And that's exactly what I did in the book.
So you described, jumping ahead a little bit there, and then to keep with the theme that we're kind of on, you described in the book a particular character which you dubbed MFB, right? One of your first real positions in the Navy. And it's interesting to me because it was one of the first positions. You're younger, right around 23, if I recall, age-wise. And so you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you have this leader that hopefully and fortunately, and I personally don't know, but it's all too common, but not necessarily the most common leadership style, but one that leads with fear. And you gave, even more interestingly, a fear pyramid, which I was not intimately familiar with, and at the tip of the fear pyramid being kind of the ego death. I wanted to kind of talk about, that was one of the first moments when I started taking notes, because ego death, I don't see all that often. Transparently, the first time I had heard and was familiar with it was the description of what happens in a shroom kick that goes a little too far to the right or whatever, indicating death of ego. Is that so I had to write it down because it was kind of like, so for one, I'm curious, is that a common term? Is this fear pyramid a common thing? It's not something I'd heard of before. Maslow's pyramid of needs, I'm familiar with that one, but not the fear pyramid. And then I'm going to talk more about MFB, but I want to talk specifically about that first.
So in the book, I reached out to MFB before I put this in the book. I felt sorry for MFB. And the reason why I felt sorry for him is, if you read the book, he yelled at me so loud one time, and I didn't make an egregious mistake. It was an inconvenience mistake. He yelled at me so loud that I actually peed my pants. And that fear and that PTSD will never go away. And it wasn't me. If you look at prior ships that he had, this was his second command. And I talked to one of the people that actually served underneath him in a previous ship. I won't mention his name, but he was the only junior officer to stay in of over 30, officers because of his leadership style. And if you look at where we were at the time, it was during the Reagan era that we had so many ships that if you had a pulse, that you're a commanding officer. And so that era in that generation, it was, I wouldn't say acceptable, but it was more routine to have that. And so this generation will not put up with that. And if these organizations don't understand that if they're not compassionate with their workers, they're not going to put up with this in this generation. And MFB, yes, this was the time period where, whatever excuse or reason why he did that, one was he wasn't trained properly how to build relationship, which I contribute to the system. But two, at the time, the Navy was really putting a standard on fitness. And so he was overweight. And so he was starving himself and he became a grizzly bear to make it worse. So but what that environment he did, when you read in the book, it was just simply unacceptable for anybody. And the stress that he put, I guarantee you that he caused people to get out and caused them to, go to substance use disorder. But also what you see prevalent today, it does still exist in some of the organizations. There are fear-based leaders, and they think that the old way of do what you're told, don't ask questions, never challenge superiors like it is in the military, but it's not, it's a perceived leadership style. They think that, and this is one of the contributing factors in hospital, they still are not changing over. And so if you get a doctor or surgeon that leads that way, that's typically, because they're so like godlike air, like how they're doing it, that no one's willing to speak up. And this is contributing to the error rates associated with that. So going forward, is MFB, was this unique? I would say at the time, no, but it is getting less. But you can read in the following chapters, I would say an apathetic leader, that one is just worried about themselves and what their next rank is, and they're using people as objects instead of people. That is persistent today. And in my opinion, it's just as bad as that toxic leader.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the one of the things I've enjoyed most about the book is if I have not been through the Navy, my ability to kind of overwrite my experiences, and almost it's helped me a little bit. I wouldn't quite say work through trauma, but work through, because I've had scenarios where, right, somebody's yelling at me, and I don't know if it's just me or other people too, but you look back on that and you're like, so when I'm reading that chapter, right, I'm thinking this is interesting, because Robert is fearful to the point of urinating himself, and yet he's only being yelled at. What is the perceived fear? There's not he's screaming at you, he's spitting on you, that's how, but he's not punching you, he's not killing you. And when I've had similar sort of situations where I've been fearful, I look back and it's like, what was that fear? Because they didn't threaten me with life or death, and yet I've been in that situation where, maybe not quite to that extent, but I've been in situations where I swear I threw up in my mouth, and it's like, and then you look back and you're like, you threw up in your mouth. What caused that? Because what was the worst that could happen? It's not like they've ever laid their hands on me, or would they, or could they? And yet it's helped me. What I'm getting at here is it's helped me know I'm not alone, from the perspective of, and then the question is, what is that fear? Where does that come from? Later in the book, you describe situations where MFB clearly was capable of putting people's lives in danger, and so there was definitely a fear of life. But this instance, assuming it happened in chronological order, would indicate it was earlier in your tour, and thus you may not have even had exposure to instances like that.
Yes. So he was my first commanding officer in my first ship. And so that was my first experience. But going back, you had to hit so much importance on this. It was so much more than being fearful, of saying that, but it really affects the culture. You become robots when you have somebody that leads with fear. And when you become a robot, you're going to do whatever it takes just not to get in trouble. You're not going to speak up. You're not going to have this this mindset that you're going to go above and beyond or look for other things that are at fault. And the speaking up and psychological safety goes almost to zero. And when that happens, bad things will happen. And if you read in the book, I talk about a main engine casualty, $9 million, where they shifted lube oil coolers and it was full of air. And what it was is that people were paralyzed. Supervisors, they knew that this was going on, but instead of saying, I am going to go down there to make sure that this is going to go right because I love this ship, I love the people that I'm with, they were paralyzed. And they only did what they had to do. So this young sailor shifted these lube oil coolers and it caused $9 million of damage, no backup. And that mindset, that culture, when you lead with fear or a mindset that do as you're told, don't ask questions, never challenge superiors, that definitely correlates to safety. It correlates to your bottom line. It affects and here's something for neuroscience is that your brain, when you're stressed out, you don't collaborate, you don't innovate, you just get to this point in your mind that you don't have these thoughts that you can really look to improve your organization. And so this type of leadership, even in our most, like I would say but billion-dollar companies, is they're struggling with their ability to innovate, collaborate. Well, when you don't lead with a caring mindset of this and you can reduce the stress and trust, that directly affects the mindset where people just do what they're told and nothing more.
So let me reframe the question then, and I'm going to ask it almost as if I were a fear-based leader, because I swear I could almost hear the fear-based leader voices in my head when I was reading that chapter. So the question would go something like, what are they afraid of? I'm just going to yell at them. Man, if they can't handle my yelling at them, then they're not going to be able to handle a real situation where real lives are on the line. Kids today are just soft.
So I think it's a two-part question, and I'll tell you why. I've thought a lot about this. Why do people be that way, right? And there's times that I went to the dark side as well because I didn't know any better. When I first left that ship, I started leading with fear as well because I thought that was a leadership style. But until I learned it from grooms and compassionate, or when I started to see that other people were affecting others because they weren't leading with love, I still, held them accountable in that way. So two things. One, I don't think they're ever taught, right? They were taught in the nuclear Navy or any organization that leadership is about command and control, about doing what, being in charge. And so when someone doesn't do something, they don't look themselves in the mirror. They immediately lash out at the individual and think that they're bad apples instead of looking at themselves to see what are they doing being in charge that to create this. So one, it's how they were taught. The second thing, and again, this is going into a little bit more in depth, but what I found in the hospital systems, when there is this sense of leading with love, like, hey, let's talk about this and so forth, where burnout sets in. And one of the physicians that I dealt with, he says, I would go to this place and it was like Groundhog's Day. He says, every time I went there, I need this tool, I need this tool, I need this tool. Do you understand? This is why, And then next week he would go, he'd say the same thing. And after 5 weeks, right, after going to the leadership or whatever resources they need, that it got to the point of burnout. It drove him to the point where I needed to yell. That was the only way, yelling, could I get results. And this is where the leadership understands that when you do this, that you're instilling, while not giving the resources to the appropriate people, you are causing this as leadership or not giving the right resources and so forth, that creates this atmosphere of not leading with love. They're not doing it on purpose. And again, I think it's twofold. And the last thing I'll tell you, it's easy, right? How easy is it to yell at somebody or hold someone accountable? It is extremely easy. It's the easy way. And in my book, I talk about how I never took people to mast. It's called NJP, where I would put them in front of the green table. Very few people I did that because that was so easy. I would just say, all right, XO, write them up. I'll take them to mast. And I would show an example. I took very few people to mast. And the reason I did that is because I routinely looked at myself in the mirror first to see what I did. But after I set those expectations and they still did it, That's leading with love. It's accountability. And people wanted you to hold them accountable because they didn't uphold the standards and they were hurting the family. So I think it's threefold. One, it's training. Two, it's the environment that causes them to act that way. Or three, it's so easy. It's so much easier to hold someone accountable with a tool like yelling or taking them to mass or hold them accountable or blaming them instead of yourself to your boss than it is to build relationships, look yourself in the mirror and fix the problem to go with. And that's what leading with love is.
Thank you. I'm yeah. So it was cool to see the next commanding officer though in the line, and how you use just a little bit of information to get what you needed to request for the correct post, and then to have it pay off. Because I was half concerned in reading. I was like, oh man, which direction is this going to go? It may not, maybe it backfires on him. But then another thing you brought up in the book that I really liked, I think particularly from that commanding officer, I should have put more context here, was I like that you brought up at one point that the blame game, that it's you avoid part of the leading with love, right? Is it's less important who made the problem as an individual and more important that the problem was made at all as a team and to fix it. And I think that's something we kind of get into the weeds on sometimes, to the point about MFB and a leadership that maybe projects a lack of self-confidence, right? And a lack of inward looking on what did I do wrong. It's that instant sort of, you even gave examples of, on the valve issue. No, when you received information that you were supposed to be going to a specific place and you were about 2 days, I think, off course was what it ended up boiling down to. And there was a team of people deciding, who's going to tell them? And it's your turn, and it's your turn, and he likes you better. It's like, are you kidding me? I already had to talk to him today. And it's that blame game. It costs extra time and energy and effort, versus just coming to the conclusion of and having a leadership style that fosters this. Okay, I made a mistake. If the leader's capable of admitting that he can make mistakes, then easy enough for me to admit that I've made a mistake. Yeah. And anyway, I don't know. I guess there's not really a question there like there should be. It was more like I wanted to acknowledge that.
But it goes back to, I give the example, is that when we had the person that caused the main engine casualty, the guy who, it's just a compounding Swiss cheese model, James Reason events, right? The sailor who tripped it over lube oil coolers that were empty, right? That probably wouldn't have been, it never would have happened the way it did if we weren't going at max speed. It's called a head flank, basically max speed towards a certain direction. And the reason why the ship was going in max speed is because they had a sailor on board with an appendicitis, right? And so when you have a medical emergency on board, you don't have a suite of doctors to be able to do this and diagnose it. So the first thing you do is you have a MDR, a medical person on board, and he does the vitals, and as a format message, it gets sent off of what the conditions are. Then you have shoreside that look at this, and they will come back of what they expect to do. Is he safe to stay on board, do this, give him this drug, and so forth. And in this case, they said immediately go to the nearest port, which they expected, and take this sailor off because he has appendicitis, and it's important to get him off as soon as possible before it bursts, and it could cause potentially a life-threatening illness. But in this point is right before they went deep, because you don't have communications, right before they went deep, they didn't expect it to be this quick. They got a message in to go east, right? And they went down for the night, MFB, and they went west to think that the port was going to be west instead of east, because that was the closest land. And so this message was sitting on board for overnight as they're going west where they should have been going east. So the next turnover, about 6 hours later, as they're doing a watch turnover, he says, oh my gosh, we got this message on board that we should be going that way, and we're going this way. And you can imagine, the the crisis that they had. And so that's when they went through and says, who's going to wake them up? Who's going to tell them? But the root cause was that culture was on board, is that they were acting like robots, right? There was no critical thinking. There was no backup. Like, I'm going to make sure that we do this. I'm going to check you. I care for you, that this is not going to happen to us. Our shipmates potentially dying. That didn't exist because of the paralyzing culture on board of that fear or apathy, that they just didn't care. And they were treated like they were acting like robots. And when they actually found out, that contributed to the main engine casualty, because they had to go ahead flank, and the compounding effect was shifting the lube oil coolers. So if you really look at the root cause, wasn't the lube oil cooler, wasn't they missed the message, it was the culture that caused this, that almost killed somebody.
Well, now that I have more context, my first question too is, if west is the closest land and you've been going that direction overnight, is it really such a big emergency to require all ahead flank? Couldn't you almost say, I mean, I don't know the Navy logistics here, but how big a deal would it have been to say, this sat here overnight, we're headed this direction, what are the odds that somebody can meet us there?
So
in a much more formal capacity, I'm sure.
Yeah, not to go into detail, but obviously, I'm sure that decision was discussed. But, if they look at the time it would send to create a new message, send it off, wait for a response, it would have been, they knew that they could have made the East, or, I think he didn't have transparency was another factor in this.
Yeah.
Big of leading with love. And so he didn't want to tell anybody that he made a mistake. So once he knew he could make it going ahead flank, he did it. And so that was and if he waited any longer to keep on going west, then it would new message. So there's a lot of factors involved associated.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. What is it like after being burned from a leader? Because so you have this leader, and then you're going into a new leader, and obviously you're fearful of the notion of them being a bad leader. So a good example for me, I remember this clearly because I once had a manager. I told him he's the best manager I ever had, and it was really only probably my second or third. And he, in the typical good leader style, in retrospect, turns to me and says, "You must not have had a lot of managers." And on one hand, he was probably right. On the other hand, I think that's the response that a good leader would give. It's like, meet more managers and then come back to me. My point there is that was shortly after a bad manager. And so it was a different experience, right? Where it's like, your eyes are open to something new. What's kind of that like? And specifically with regards to, how long did it take you before you truly trusted that when they said, the good leader, I would like your opinion here, they meant it and weren't testing you into some sort of, let me catch him off guard and then punish him for it?
So great question. And I will tell you that I thank God that I had that experience, because at times we learn more from a bad leader than we do good leader of not how to act. And really the emotional impact and safety and success that type of leadership has on an organization. And if you truly really care for the people that you work with, you vow to never do that. And so that lesson was so essential to me writing this book, because if I thought it was always, rose glass, glasses that are just amazing leadership, I wouldn't write this book. So he gave me that opportunity to be able to do that. And so going forward, did I have PTSD? Yes, absolutely. Did I hold it against other leaders? The answer is no. And so, some build trust immediately and then you got to take it away. And some, you have no trust, you have to gain it. Trust is like going to the gym, right? And there's 3 components of trust that are so important. One, you're not going to trust somebody that doesn't have good intentions, right? That's love. Like they're not empathetic, vulnerable, and so forth. The next one is you're not going to trust somebody that doesn't follow up with their words with actions, right? So you really can gain this. So if a leader always follows up their words with actions, your trust meter is building up. Or if they're leading with empathy and vulnerability, it's going up. And the last component of trust is competency, right? This is why a leader that's just starting out is you as a manager, that's why your leader says, don't, I'm not going to put you in this position to lead people that you're not competent, right? It requires experience and so forth. And so by doing these things and leading with this, your competency level as a leader goes up. And that's where it's so important to build that trust. And so to say that I had this like I didn't trust everybody or, I would say there's PTSD, but once I found that and someone that really did care for me, like Grooms, I really attracted that person even more because it felt magical. And I felt, I got up I got up every day wanting to go to work. I wanted to make sure I didn't disappoint him or the crew. It was magical. And that's what really, really I'd like to share in this book. And again, any leader that wants to bring their game to levels they've never seen before, in this book and this framework, it talks about that.
Something I thought that was interesting is after that experience with Grooms, so you go from a bad leader to a great leader, and then you're about to be repositioned, or that leader's been swapped out, so now you have another leader, and you're about to have a post chosen for you. Delister, I think, is what that's called, right? That person that now I'm remembering. Okay, so what I thought was interesting because it mimics me, and I want to talk about it, so hopefully I can help enlighten some of my processes. You immediately went to the fear of the worst possible scenario in the unknown. They issued you orders, which you indicated in the book. Navy orders are almost kind of a verbal sort of like, hey, here's what we think is likely to happen when it comes to your post. And that might get swapped up a few times potentially. And it was. And you immediately went to the fear of the worst possible outcome, which I thought was interesting, and it mimicked what I might do in that situation, frankly, versus not, not worrying about spilled milk, so to speak, or, and I literally recently was asking about this, and it was one of the tricks that was given me was like, well, what if you just assume everything goes right? And then what would that be like? And I'm like, wait, that's an option? We can just flip the script on itself and think about what is that? Is that something you still do from time to time in the fear of the unknown? Is that just a natural human trait that we've brought on as a result of, we don't know if that snake is poisonous or not, so best just fear it in general and move on?
And so, like I said, you learn so much from your past experience. And I'll put this in context of what happened is that I went home one day when MFB was there, and I said to my wife, I said, don't let me stay in the Navy one more day than I have to. And she said, I promised. And then we had a great XO that came in with care, and he kept the fire going. It was about to go out. I was about to put in my paperwork. And then I went to another assignment. And then during that assignment, it was required that I went back. And so I thought to myself, I don't know if I can do this, but I'll give it one more try, right? Because it was a great orders, and it was rekindled by that one leader that was caring. At this time, when I was about to go through these multiple orders, my father died by suicide. And that gap of not having my father, that loving family, it really caused me to pause. That me being away from my wife, who was just wonderful, just such a sounding board. But when you go out to sea, and again with nurses, if you spend 80% of your time in a work floor, the people that you work with become your family. And so I started to really get worried because I couldn't tolerate another MFB based on the loss of my father. There was a vacuum. And so I was there through the third iteration. And in the book, I talk about this. I don't want to rehash that. But there were two other officers in the bathroom. They said, "Hey, have you heard what happened to this officer who was supposed to go to the USS Asheville? He broke his leg." And he says, he's no longer going. He says, "But I would do anything to go work for that commanding officer. His name is Grooms." And what does it mean that you would go do anything to work for a leader? Is it because he's competent? Is it because he's technically competent or tactically? No, he cares for people. I didn't have to ask him anything. I said, I knew that that's the submarine I want to go to, just how people talk about you behind their back. And we went to that the Asheville with Grooms. And that's where I learned leading with love. And in fact, correlation, again, this is not a sign of weakness. We became the best submarine in the squadron. And when we posted things on this book, I could see different errors of when things would happen. When I posted this on the team that I served on that boat with, there was overwhelming, like I would do anything to go back to that time. That was magical time. This Grooms is an incredible leader, legendary leader. I would do anything to work for that guy. This is leadership. This is a people years later talk about incredible leadership and how you made an impact on your life. And in fact, I just posted, there was a 20-year reunion for the USS Texas where I commanded. And in there, what brought me so much joy, there was 7 or 8 people that said, "I'm not going to this thing unless Navy Bob goes." That little thing made so much joy. And it wasn't because of my tactical ability. It was because how I treated these people. This gift of leading with love continues for generations to come. And that's where I think that, people don't understand that leading with love, there are no downsides. That you're in leadership to take care of people. And you will not only do that, and we can talk about this later, is that you not only will have outcomes far exceed, you will build a legendary culture and you become a legendary leader, but you will lead a good life. And I'd love to talk about that when you get a chance.
Yeah, no, but kind of circling back. So the question was essentially, the fear of the unknown for you prompted in the book, it was maybe even just a small section where just before you kind of took matters in your own hands, went to the delister and was like, "I'd like to get stationed with this commanding officer if possible." Before that point, your mind spiraled into the fear of the unknown because you'd had your orders changed a few times. Do you find yourself still you feared the worst possible outcome in the fear of the unknown? Do you find yourself still assuming the worst possible outcome in the fear of the unknown?
No, I would say fearful is the wrong term. My eyes are wider open to have that experience. And so my senses are more keen to that pattern. And so I become more wise. And I think that experience made me stronger. Not that I didn't trust people. It's just that experience knew that there's still people out there that are not in their best interest, you or others. And again, I feel sorry for those people because they will then not live a good life and they will not be successful. And again, I don't know what their childhood trauma is or how they taught it. And so again, I don't hold anything against people. It's just it's provided an awareness and a sense of wisdom that really is second to none.
So what I basically heard was so essentially, if you're the type of person that worries about the worst possible outcome in the event of the unknown, the best way through that is to face the unknown more. It's essentially what I heard, because you ended up with more experiences, good and bad.
Yeah. And
that.
And I would say, I'm not pushing religion, but you have to have faith. And you're on this earth for such a short period of time. You have to have faith that whatever happens to you happens for a reason. And I wouldn't write this book or be in the position to help so many leaders and make this world a better place if I didn't have those experiences. If I left the Navy when I was underneath MFB and my wife, said, "Yes, get out and we'll go start, new life somewhere else," there's no doubt I would have never wrote this book. None. And so that faith of knowing that things are happening for a reason gives you comfort and really quenches that fear of going forward.
Well, and I agree. I think there's something to that. So I'm a man of faith, but what's interesting is if Jordan Peterson would say it this way, your entire internal clock is based on the premise of an absolute truth. The very fact that you're moving forward in time, basically, and how you wake up in the morning and the reason you wake up in the morning, it's all on the premise of an absolute truth. And if there is an absolute truth, that means we might be rediscovering it again and again and again, potentially, but there's ultimately going to be a truth underneath these concepts like love. It's like it may sound like a rehashing, and maybe it's a different word, and maybe it's not agape or a phileo but at the end of the day, the premise underneath the word might remain the same, whatever it is. And it would have to, in the case of the existence of an absolute truth, which, if you believe Jordan Peterson, and I would, our very nature assumes an absolute truth.
So yes, I am a practical person. I got my doctorate and I studied leadership, and building relationships is not me trying to sell snake oil on the side of the road. It's over 50 years of academic research that shows that if you improve your relationships, authentic relationships, your outcomes will go up. So I'm following this premise. But going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so this person in the 60s, really in-depth research, this is so well known. And it basically, as you know, gave a pyramid of what the human nature needs. So the bottom line is just food, water, like basic necessities, right? If you look in America, $30,000 is the top 1% of the world, amongst the world, right? So we have our basic needs met, right? Assuming that we're healthy and so forth. So that going back, and if you're a leader that someone's struggling where they can't, then absolutely that's the basic needs. But if you look it up, right? I'm not going to go through the whole entire thing, but one of them is belonging and love, right? People love, this is what people need. And it's the third rung. But if you look at the top, when you said everything happens for a reason and everything is at the top, is where you get a few small, really small percentage of people like Jordan Peterson that has met that criteria. Now they're in a position that they don't need food, that they already experienced belonging. They already got up to the point, the top, and very few people, in my opinion, they're in this to really make a difference in this world. And that is the ultimate goal. So if you can start making a difference in this world, and we can get to that, that's when you'll find that you're really living a good life. And when you get that, that is what I believe the purpose is of why we're here on earth. It's not how much money you make. It's not what car you drive, because you see billionaires that are just miserable. The happiest people are the people that really affect people's lives for the good. And leading with love, that's what this does. Just like how it said, grooms, oh, I would give anything, right? He affected so many people that then paid it forward to so many other people. And if you look at the impact one person had on how he led with love, it was just immense. That was just immense. And so if you look, I've always questioned, why are we on this earth, right? The question, what is a good life? And so when I was getting underway as a captain, I started questioning, like carrying the nuclear codes, tracking multiple different submarines, affecting national security. That was all great, but there was this vacuum. Like, what is it? What is my real purpose on this earth? And there was something that I was missing. And so Mr. Rogers has this wonderful saying. He says, God has put us on this earth for one purpose and one purpose only. And that purpose is to serve others. And when you find your purpose to serve others, the wholeness fulfillment that you will feel will be undeniable. And I like to share, and again, I know I'm going long, but in the book, you haven't got to it yet, is that by leading with love, that example that I said, Petty Officer Mankins, how are you? How's your family? I wanted to share this one quick story and the aha and the incredible gift that leading with love gave to me that really was an aha moment for me. So 4 years went by after I left to Texas, and I went back to Pearl Harbor, now in charge of 10 submarines, the squadron, Squadron 7. He's out running that day, Petty Officer Mankins, and He sees me 4 years later. I haven't seen him since I left to Texas. Never contacted him, didn't know his email. And I said, Pastor Menkins, is that you? He says, Kameranska, how are you? I said, how's your wife, Amber? She's great. He said, do you mind if I stop by your office later today? I said, absolutely. So I carved out, I see him, come on in. You know, I closed, I said, hey, so we sat down. He says, listen, he says, my orders to leave to Texas has always been in October this year, and it's April. He goes, my wife and I, Amber, we've been trying to get pregnant repeatedly for over 3 years, and we can't. We know it's an infertility treatment. And for 2 years, we've been on this waiting list at Tripler Hospital. They have this program they can't afford out in town, and there's no other place to do this but Tripler Hospital in the Navy. And he says, we finally, after 2 years, got on the waiting list to get infertility treatments. He says, my wife, you know, just so happy. All we want in life is to have a child. And he says, I just got orders to change these, and everyone knew it was at stake, to leave in June instead of October, right? And my first appointment is in July, which means I can't do this. And I went to my leadership every day for the last 2 weeks, and no one's helping me. When I called the person placing these orders, like Jim at the time, it wasn't Jim, but somebody like him, he starts yelling at Petty Officer Menkins and says, suck it up, Buttercup. Try harder. You're in the military. They're called orders for a reason. Stop having people calling me, and starts yelling at him and says, I'm not entertaining this anymore. And he hangs up the phone. I immediately called that individual. I said, shipmate, I said, this is what you're going to do. It was a Monday. I said, by Friday, you're going to change these orders back to October. I said, if you don't, I'm calling the 4-star admiral myself. This is not how we treat people. These weren't mission essential orders. There was, you know, basically a shell game just to conveniently, you know, what was at stake, and no one saw this, and no one was helping him, even in his chain of command, that this was the most important of how we treat people. So I said, by Friday, you're going to change these, or I'm calling the 4-star admiral. I hang up the phone. October, he calls me, tells me his wife is pregnant. And then when I'm writing this book, it's in the book, he sends me a picture of his 3-year-old child called Caroline. He says, you and God are the only reasons why my sweet Caroline is here. The wholeness I felt, I started to cry. And this is,
Me again.
we're in this world. And just for the audience to know, Petty Officer Menkins, after 4 years, would have never came up to me and asked for my help if I didn't lead with love, if I didn't build those relationships. And in that moment was one of the greatest successes I ever had in my lifetime. I was responsible for helping him bring the most precious thing in this world, which was a child. Far exceeded me ever carrying the nuclear codes, ever mission vital to national security. By far, this was the greatest gift I have ever done for anybody. And it came to me, and all it took was a 20-second phone call. And this was one of the greatest lives that I could. And this is what I want to share with the audience. This is leading a good life. And I will share one of the great stories that I have is just listen to this. Is you've seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life with George Bailey. George Bailey thinks he's a failure because he lost money. He didn't lose it. But then he calls up to God, and clearance comes down. He says, all right, we're going to grant him a gift. We're going to show what it would be like without him born. Then he goes in front of the gravestone of his brother George, or his brother Harry, and he says, my brother's not dead. He was the Medal of Honor winner. He saved all these people. He says, no, George, you weren't there to save him because you weren't there to save Harry. Then he goes where the old maid, he sees his wife coming out of his thing. He says, no, she's an old maid because you weren't there to marry her. Then you go see, Pottersville, and then you see Mr. Gower drunk because he wasn't there. So then at the end, his brother comes in and says, the richest man in town, to my brother, George Bailey. And it's about, if you want to live a wonderful life, it's about service to others. And that's what leading with love can do for you.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, quick shout out too. So we interviewed a coach, Mary Messner, and her presentation specifically was, and one of the things she says is, by asking for help, the person unwittingly becomes a part of your dream, but then also you kind of become a part of their dream. And I feel like that's very representative of the situation where he came up to you because you curated a culture of love and he asked for you for help. And you ultimately became an investor in his dream and at the same time received fulfillment in that. So that's fantastic. On one hand, I don't want to come off topic too much, but there at least a couple of these questions are selfish. I don't want to particularly make it political either, but kind of hard not to when you're talking about things like nuclear launch codes and the football and whatnot. So when you, because that is politics, but I think we could do it without political parties. So you bring up great points as to why nuclear weapons currently is a deterrent for war. And I was kind of curious. I had heard recently, I actually had to look it up. I didn't know this, that Ukraine willingly gave up the nuclear armaments that they had at behest of external pressures in exchange for assurances. Now, we don't have to talk too much about assurances because that will get political, but I did want to get your opinion on, was that the right call?
So, I'm not going to comment on the right call in that specific instance, but I'll give you some context and why this is so important. Is that if you look at the number of people that died during World War I and World War II, we're talking about 40 million and 71 million respectively worldwide. Incredible casualties. And if you look at the casualties after World War II, we've never had a world war since. And yes, we've had wars, and every life is valuable. But if you look at the number of people that have died since World War II, and if you look at how back to back that was, there were 30 years. And since World War II, 1945, it's now almost a decade or a century later, right? Why is that? There's no other way to explain it, is the advent of the nuclear bomb, nuclear weapons. So I am not a fan of what we did with Nagasaki or Hiroshima and what we did. But if you look at the amount of lives that we saved because of this deterrence, the facts state itself, right? And one of the most survivable leg of the triad, the triad is consisted of three things. One is the bombers, two is the ICBMs, and three is the ballistic missile submarine, which I was on with MFB. And the most survivable leg of that triad is, without question, the nuclear ballistic missile submarine, because no one knows where that submarine is, with the exception of the people on board.
You brought up another question, by the way, and I don't want to cut you off, but why is that? Is there something about nuclear signatures why is that one not detectable?
Well, because they know where our ICBMs are, because satellites, you can't move that overnight. And the bombers with satellite, they can see where the bombers are when they take off and so forth. But when a ballistic missile submarine leaves the port and they're so quiet, and you give an area the size of Texas and California, no one knows where they are, even the United States, except for the people in the submarine. So that security of not knowing where they're at, but they're in constant communication, is so vital to national security. And that's why they're so the most survivable leg of the triad.
Well, and it's interesting because that aspect reminded me too of something in security in general, and that is the well, for lack of any better term that I could think of, the fear or impression of being caught or being detected is oftentimes a deterrent. An example being a dummy camera versus a real one, right? Deterring somebody. And then what's become kind of interesting too that I've noticed in cybersecurity, and it's weird, I wish I had an excuse for it. So I used to be incredibly hesitant of somebody that said, don't worry, trust us, this, that, and the other, and weird pithy sayings like this. But I've come to notice that the person most fearful of being watched in a scenario like security oftentimes are the ones that actually do have the most to hide. And I know that sounds wild because it's like, yeah, but that's the same kind of thing Big Brother would say. It's like, yes, but I've also seen firsthand where it's like in cybersecurity, we're watching for a lot of stuff. The example I gave somebody is it's like, just assume I'm the mailman. Every piece of letter and mail goes through our hands, but like the mailman, we're putting it through a bomb detector and we're not going to rip open the package unless the alarm goes off. It's always fascinating to me when people see us putting up the alarm sniffers or whatever you want to call it, security cameras, sometimes there are people that will kind of get anxious. And it's odd to get confirmation of like, they were anxious for a reason versus anyway. So I just I put that experience over top when I was reading that. I was like, that's fascinating to me. Carrying the nuclear launch codes and being in the final room, I believe, is the section where you talked about experiencing imposter syndrome. And I think you put it as imposter syndrome, but if not, that's what you described perfectly. But I think you did. How did you deal with that then? How have you since dealt with that? Because I personally, it's funny because there are people I talk to that it really feels like they don't struggle with it. I don't know how. And then there's people I talk to like me where I do have moments where I'm in a room, I'm talking to somebody, and I have this sort of out of body experience, for lack of any better term, where you described it like somebody was going to come up and tap on your shoulder and say, hey, you're not here. Mine is almost like a voice that says, you were pretending, you're faking this whole time. You're just a little kid playing pretend, and it's time to grow up now and recognize that you shouldn't be here doing this thing. You haven't earned it. You haven't, just walk up and leave, come up with some solid excuse as to why you really shouldn't be in the room and leave. How have you dealt with that?
So I think it's a blessing in disguise at the same time. One, in my book, I talk about coming up in a humble environment, as a kid, on a farm. And, when I went to the nuclear Navy, there was this sense of, I don't belong here even then. Right. And so it started there. But if you look at the characteristics of a wonderful leader, humble is one of the key aspects. And so being in imposter syndrome of always questioning, am I good enough? It really will make people trust you more because you're so humble. And I believe that everybody on this earth has a gift. I don't know what that gift is because God has seen them, is that everybody is a significant contributor in some way or another. And so my gifts is to be able to, where I became wasn't because, I was standing out in front of everybody like this gifted brainchild. It was because something guided me along the way to be able to get where I was, right? It was by some chance, some is faith and some is just, it was meant to be. And so that imposter syndrome, I think, helped me because it then made the environment where I led more authentic and more vulnerable. And that actually increased trust and love where I was going forward. And so I wouldn't say my imposter syndrome is so bad that I don't act. It's just, it makes me question on how did I get there? And I'm always looking to make sure that whatever opportunity I have is that I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And so I would say it's a blessing in that sense. But it also is something where I'm not arrogant, where I think that I know all the answers, that I'm this gift to so many people that you should listen to me because I'm Bob Ronska. It's not that at all. And so I think having imposter syndrome is a great trait for any leader to have in a limited fashion.
So interesting. So you view it as almost kind of a prompt for gratitude, a gratitude opportunity for those that have come before.
I don't know. And again, this is off the cuff. I've never answered this question before, but if I look back, do I have it? Absolutely. Do I feel that I was given this because I deserved it, because I was gifted? The answer is absolutely not. But I do believe that has helped me build love in those relationships, to know that I was not ever giving something because I deserved it or I had to work for it. And so that, I think, is a gift going forward.
Thank you. I have another question. I don't see how this doesn't get political and negative, but it is an interesting one. So you served with George W. Bush and that administration. You specifically note, how we got over there and we're engaging with the Taliban, giving the fact that they harbored the terrorists. I couldn't help but recount a recent book I actually couldn't finish reading, if I'm being honest, called Operation Pineapple Express. And it details our exit from Iraq. And whether I think we can skip over some of this and ignore the exit decision, but there's zero doubt if you read that book that the exit was not what it should have been. Why I thought of this when I saw the Taliban was there's a specific passage where he goes into detail where I think it was the Taliban. We ended up having to partner with them for the sake of just making a clean exit, or a clean enough exit given the crowds. I don't know. I guess I wanted to, what have kind of been your thoughts there given the administration you served with?
So in my book, if you haven't got there yet, I don't talk about his political decisions. Either you have your own judgment if they're right or wrong, but what I comment on is how he dealt with those and how and what I learned leading with love from the highest level of office. And I'll give some examples of what I mean by that. So like you said, the fist bumps, right? Earlier on, like somebody that did or you calling somebody to wish them a happy birthday. What he did, he had nicknames for everybody. And so if you read in the book, he nicknamed me Navy Bob, and he had nicknames for everybody. It was the stork, the mailman, you name it. He developed nicknames for everybody. And the reason he did that, looking back, I never asked him, why do you get nicknames for every year? People just loved it. What he did, it provided this empathy that made you feel like a person. Here's the leader of the free world taking time out of his day to acknowledge me and give me a nickname. I got it. Hate him, love him, whatever you want. But what I saw by doing that, it built such a culture that in fact, we still, as a family today in the military or in the White House, across everything from the White House aides to the everybody that served with him at the time. In fact, we're doing an event at Rollins College where Mr. Rogers went here next month. And some of the people on this panel is Pete Seat, Jason Record, Dr. Coleman, who used to be the physician to the president, myself, and General Hertling, who went to Rollins College. And the theme is of this magical culture that we've seen at the White House and how it relates to Rollins College, right? And so it started from the top and was President Bush. And in my book, I talk about how I would take him the situation report at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would present him either we lost people or we didn't lose people. And his demeanor in the middle of I don't want to rehash the thing, but it was clear that it was just me and him underneath the Texas sky. And the days that I told him that we didn't lose anybody, he turned into like a kid in a candy store, right? Just unbelievable. And this really weighed on him. And then those days that I said we would lose somebody, he would just grab the paperwork and walk inside. And that was it. He didn't put on a show for me. This was sincere, like how this affected him. Regardless of your decisions of what he did, for him to make that decision and really, I would have lost so much respect for the man if he would just like, oh, we lost somebody last night. No, it really bothered him. And that decision of how he needed to make sure that people around the world were protected. And yes, this was the cost of our soldiers. And that was the decision he made. I'm not saying right or wrong, but regardless, that empathy and how he treated people was just indescribable. And it really affected the culture that we had there. And it really related to the submarine or what I've seen in healthcare. And this is really giving example after example by leading with love. And I'm saying you call it whatever you want, compassion, whatever. So if you don't like love, it's leading with an ability to treat people like people instead of objects and tools, and worry about your next rank or position
you're
gonna buy. That is what I learned through this book.
If you focus on the people versus the objective or the decision, then at the end of the day, in some cases, more lives are saved. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a beautiful answer to that question too, which wasn't even quite posed as a question. I also don't view it in the same sort of way. It's hard to say your answers are political because of the position you carried. You're giving firsthand, first account experience and opinions just based on other individuals, not political parties, not decisions, which I think, to your point, is almost a fantastic example of how Leading with Love can even be brought into politics, right? Because at the end of the day, if we are considering each other as individual human beings and talking of each other in a loving fashion, then it's not red or blue. It's we're both want to see the best outcome, really.
And Sam, I'll just make a point. If the leader of the free world can do it, and a guy who carried the nuclear codes in charge of a $2 billion nuclear submarine, and I've seen it in top-notch physicians in the hospital, anybody can do this. And it's not something that's taught. It's a new way of leadership that will forever change your life, and it'll bring the best out of you and all those people around you, and you will lead a wonderful life.
So I've got a few more questions here. I actually had a friend of mine, I asked him if there was anything I should ask. So and I don't know how much detail you can or can't go into here because it may speak more to the object, but in carrying the nuclear launch codes or the nuclear football or whatever, frankly, that briefcase is, were you nervous you could unwillingly destroy the entire world at any given time?
Yes. Absolutely. The amount of destruction could have destroyed the world. There's no doubt in my mind. But what gave me confidence or solidarity, it was not solidarity, it would comfort, was knowing that because I was carrying that I was actually saving lives of what I was doing because of that deterrence. That gave me the strength to know what I was doing wasn't here to cause destruction. And I gave you those examples earlier, is that I was here to save lives. And that comfort really gave me the strength to be able to have that awesome responsibility to facilitate Armageddon. I didn't want to facilitate Armageddon. That was the last thing I wanted to do. But I knew that me being there and having that capability really played a huge role on saving so many lives and so much heartache. And that is why I so much enjoyed carrying the nuclear codes.
So before we start to kind of move into wrap up, is there anything we didn't, I worry we didn't quite even get to where you're at now. Is there anything in particular you wish we would have gone over?
No, I think this is great. We could talk about the book, but in the book, I give examples about leading with love. We're in the process of really coming up with a curriculum, a seminar, and also consulting where it can really put behaviors associated with core values with leading with love. And again, call it whatever you want. Compassion. People don't like love because it's new, but knowing that your people are first, and through empirical evidence or evidence-based, that if you make people feel valued and you build trust and you make sure that you're leading in a way that you make people feel that they're people instead of objects. I see people chasing their, like the numbers. I got to get the numbers. And that's where, all you do, and exactly what I did on the submarine, I took the submarine from the worst to the best. And, like I said, we had the highest retention, lowest turnover in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. We scored the highest grade on any inspection. Their safety record was unbelievable. And it was because I put people first. And when you put people first with these practical tools that we're creating, and with we're even creating a Microsoft Outlook like calendar to say, meet people when they're coming into work, have these meetings, but in the meetings, this is the appropriate thing. This is how you have one-on-ones. This is how you have constructed. So we're creating that not only for college curriculums, but for organizations. This has never been done before. And this is how I know we're going to make it such an impact on this world. And it is so needed today.
Well, I think that's going to be huge because I was just thinking about, I think part of the struggle with the word love in some cases is, so if you think of like the DISC personality profiles, the D, the dominance, in their mind, it's like, okay, this is some out there. This is like me saying, it's easy. You just gotta be better. You just gotta do better. It's like, well, I wake up every morning trying to be better and do better. What does that mean in this moment, in this next minute, in this next? And what I'm hearing is you guys are doing that. You're creating the structure that personality can take that and say, oh,
So there are so many leadership books out there that just share that this is the way to do that. And again, I don't want to criticize them, but I want to take it to the next level. Not only like if we do a revision to this book of a playbook that how you can use this, like if you go want to work out, there's 1,000 different playbooks on workout plans to go to the gym, right? Monday, you're doing bench. Tuesday, you're doing legs. Where is that workout plan for building relationships for people? There isn't. That's what I'm creating. But also, I want to use academic research. If you look at Leader Member Exchange is the father of Leader Member Exchange, endorsed my book. His name is Dr. George Grant. Leader Member Exchange is a 50 years of academic research that shows that if the authentic relationship strength increases, your outcomes will go up. And there is a way to measure this. Not only am I saying do this, but you can measure it. There is a academic research called LMX7, but we're also going to take it to the next level, right? We're using DISC. And what I want to do is use neuroscience of those people that can't be empathetic. What is that through neuroscience that can help them really break through that thing so that one, not only give them a playbook, which doesn't exist today, much less we're not teaching relationship building in a leadership course, which is the most important thing because the people are the biggest fuel. But not only are we giving what leadership should be, but we're also building the tools necessary with evidence-based, but we're even taking it to the next level. We're looking at neuroscience to be able to do that. So we expect something that I'm working with top-notch people. I won't say who, but they're the most talented people in the world. And we're going to come out with a product here in the next 2 or 3 weeks that industries, academic institutions, to include high schools, everything can use this tool to really build relationships that there's no doubt in my mind. That is why leaders are in leadership. They're to lead people. So why aren't we losing Maslow's hierarchy of needs and tools and teaching people how to do that? Right now, we're not doing that. And that's the first stop.
So there's 2 questions we like to kind of end this with. So the first one is, and it's from our motto, if we've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Who's been a giant in your life? You reference many of them in the book, and so I could tell there are many. If there's one in particular you wanted to pay homage to in this moment, who would it be?
So, well, of course, my wife who's been with me, but where I learned it, the agape love, and again, agape love is different than of industry, is my father. My father didn't have much growing up. And if you read in the book, when he was 3 years old, his mother died giving childbirth to his sister, and he was put in an orphanage for 8 years. And so when he had us as family of his own, he treated us like gold. And he sacrificed so much, working countless hours so that we would have Christmas presents, and just taught me that the gift of true leadership is about having a mindset that you're in leadership, not for self-promotion or self-reward. You're in a leadership position and you are giving this wonderful opportunity to lead others. It's about others. It's not about yourself. And I learned that from my father, and I owe him so much.
Yeah, your book made me cry a lot. Especially with regards to the 3-year-old daughter incident. If you had one guiding principle that you've kind of found to be true again and again and again, I feel like it's the title of your book, realistically. We might come back to that. Maybe I have to add a stipulation like you can't say leading with love. But if there was one principle that you found to be, or pithy saying that you found to be true again and again and again, that's helped guide your decision making, what would that be?
W.W. NBD. And if you read in the book, there was people that used to work for me that would say, what would Navy Bob do? And he had a yellow sticky next to him. So whatever decision he made in leadership is he would always look to see what I would do. And it would always not be the typical way of doing stuff. And we're also creating a flow chart for just accountability. And so I would hold people accountable when it was appropriate, right? When they knew exactly that they've been trained properly, they're given the right resources, they've been told multiple times that this is what it is, right? And that way of how I handle things, and again, I'm not over religious, and I used what would Jesus do? So the key to that of what would Navy Bob do, I would always ask myself, is this a decision that is for myself to benefit me? Or is this going to improve the organization and the people that I serve? That would be the critical piece of, or question that I would ask myself. And if it was a decision that I would make that would benefit me, I wouldn't do it. But if it would be benefiting the entire crew and whatever that decision was, I never went wrong. That was what I think WWNBD, that was my litmus test of making a decision in command. Because if we were going to fail the mission, and I needed to make this decision, I would clearly make that decision. So success was just as important as leadership with love. But if I made the decision because I was worried about my next promotion or, how I was seen and it wasn't the right thing to do, I wouldn't do it, because that is an incredible way to lead, is that put yourself in check. Is that decision, does it benefit you or does it benefit the organization? And whatever that decision is, or whatever it is, that's the right answer.
How would you like people to connect with you?
So we have a website, www.navybob.com, or my email is robert.ronska, and it's the same as my book, RONCSKA, @navybob.com. So either one, love to hear your thoughts. And as we build this, is like I said, in closing, I know I wrote this book to really put out a leadership style that is the most effective, and it is applicable to any industry at any age, that you could forever, right today, change a game-changing way that you lead, right? It's going to take time. It took me about a year and a half or a year to take Texas from the worst to the best. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's consistency. But this leadership style that you can implement today will put you on a road that you far will exceed your expectations. And it will be incredible on to build a legendary culture, a Field of Dreams model where people will come to you to come to your, wherever you're at. And this is applicable even if you're not in a leadership position, and one day you will, or you're in a team, this will help you. But the key thing is, I can't do this alone. My goal and my purpose in life is to wake up every day to make this world a better place. And just by talking to you today, Sam, about your fist bumps, your calling about, happy birthday, right? Every time I meet somebody, I'm developing this great practice of people of doing that. And every time I ask, where did you learn this? And they can't answer the question. So I want to really put this in a bottle. And every listener out there, if you have a great experience or a great leader or a great tool, let's start sharing this with the world to make this world a better place, because we all know love is needed more than any time today, not only from productivity and success. And I'll share this last thing with you, Sam, is that if you look at the mental health in our world today, in 1963, John F. Kennedy changed that. He wanted to close down all the mental institutions. And he did that by signing the Community Care Act in 1963. And his goal was to put it out in a community-based care. But as soon as he signed this bill, he was assassinated. And so they closed the mental wards like one flew over the cuckoo's nest, but the funding was taken for other things. And so do you know what the number one mental health supplier is, or provider in Orange County and Miami-Dade County is? It's the prisons. The prisons are the number one provider of mental health, and this is throughout the country. And so what I want to do is, yes, we're doing this. Healthcare and mental health is a number one priority, but it starts in the workplace. The stress that is caused by this fear-based leadership, this stress, what they have found is that if you're underneath a stressful environment, you're 3.5 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder. And so if we can start changing how people lead, which are no downsides, and leading with love and compassion in the workplace instead of this cutthroat, all about product or profits, we will not only, help the world become a better place, we will help the citizens of our great country live a better life. And as I discussed, you will lead a better life because you will then have people come to you and asking for your help that you will forever change their life. And that's the real gift of leadership.
Thank you so much for your time here, Navy Bob. I'm truly honored to have been able to spend it with you.
Thank you, Sam. Truly honored as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. It's such a blessing to be able to interview such fantastic individuals. If you're interested in listening to more, we look to post every Thursday at 10 a.m. You can find us on YouTube, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much. Have a blessed day.